Okay, good evening. Welcome to the most recent installment of Building the Scottish State. I have the great pleasure this evening to have with me now Alba MP Neale Hanvey. So to talk about independence, his run on the for the Scottish Parliament, and anything that might come up during the conversation. So first of all, thanks for being with us this evening.
Thanks very much, Mark. Lovely to be here.
So let's just talk a little bit about your career, your interest in politics, and your support for independence, and just in very general terms, kind of if you could summarize your career and your interest in politics.
I guess I've always been interested in politics in one form or another. I'm not entirely sure where that interest came from, other than it was something that was discussed in my house when I was young. My mother was a trade unionist in Northern Ireland and Belfast in the telephone exchange, when of course the telephone exchange was cutting edge technology. So it might sound a bit antiquated and these days, but in those days that was cutting edge technology. And she was
did you grow up in Northern Ireland, or
I was born in Belfast, but we left Northern Ireland when I was 7 years old, and moved to Scotland then. And I think that transition was probably that cultural transition, as well as a transition from a very fiery political environment to one that was much more relaxed. That contrast was something I think that sparked an interest in me, that there was a path to be discovered that led to a better state of being, if you like.
Sure.
For me, growing up when I was a wee boy, going into the city involved army and police checkpoints. It involved the risk and threat of bombs going off, obviously the news reports of the day would include reports on terror attacks. And I remember having been in a cafe that was blown up in Belfast one time before it was blown up, and that I still remember that from a very early age. So I guess that environment makes you aware, whether you choose to be or not. And certainly, my father's background, not him personally, but his dad was he was an Orangeman. Wasn't anything that interested my father. Whereas my mother, she came from an Episcopalian background, which in Ireland at that time was probably considered a mixed marriage, because of the differences in the church and the prominence of the Presbyterian faith.
What denomination was your father?
Well, my father's parents were Presbyterian.
Okay.
They were very, very separate entities and cultures in those days. And so I think that was always something that I was aware of. I know that friends of my mum,
because the Episcopal Church is the Church of England, and whereas Presbyterian is more the Church of Scotland, if that's...
Well, no, the Episcopalians take communion, so I don't know a great deal about it, because
my dad was an Episcopal minister at one time.
Yeah. So
and we lived in the United States, and he became Unitarian, which is much more theologically liberal. So
So it was, there was a very clear distinction there in terms of that religious context in the wider sense in the north of Ireland and Ireland as an island. And certainly when we left Northern Ireland, and two of my best friends were Roman Catholic boys, and I went to chapel with them instead of going to the Church of Scotland, because I didn't have any particular prejudice there, and if I'm completely honest, it was because it was my mates and the social scene there was better, and I got on with everybody, as a younger person. But there's probably a story behind that I always remember. When we lived in the area where we lived in Northern Ireland, there was quite a strong unionist tradition. Mm-hmm. And there was friends of my mum's, two brothers that ran a business there. Part of that business was they were driving instructors, mm-hmm. and their shop business was firebombed out several times until they eventually left the community. And I remember my mum being so really upset and aggrieved that people could be chased out of a community in such a ferocious way. Mm-hmm. And that was something that I was aware of really from a very young age. We were 6. I was about 6 then. So from then I was very aware that kind of difference, or that perception of difference, could manifest in such a violent and hostile way. So I guess I questioned as simply as a young kid can do. Well, why is it okay? Why am I being told that this unionist tradition is okay when that's the kind of harm that is perpetrated in its name? So I guess I was alive to that from a very early age, and my adolescent years didn't really change my concern about principally the impact of religion on communities. So that was something that I was always very sensitive to, and it was it was really through that I guess developed my political antennae, that that it's not just about the policies and the pounds and the pence. It's about the impact and social status and different groups within a social community.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And how did you get into, what was your journey on getting into elective office?
Oh, well, that's a much longer, not longer story, but certainly a longer period of time. So I was interested in politics. I did modern studies, which is politics in secondary school, but I studied nursing after school, and so there's nothing quite as politically driven as the NHS in the UK. Mm-hmm. And so you're imbued in politics by the very nature of the work that you do. And
you worked as a nurse for some
time?
So
I originally trained as a psychiatric nurse, then did further training and worked in general nursing, and then specialised in cancer nursing, going on to run services at the Royal Marsden Hospital in London, one of the most prominent cancer centres in the world, with Cancer Research UK have facilities on that site as well. So I mean, I did pretty well in my career, but you can't exist in the NHS without being sensitive to the mores of political decisions and how they impact on the world in which you occupy and the services that you can provide to patients. So I was always aware of that, and so after a period of ill health, and at the end of the noughties, and I moved back up to Scotland to recover, and I was very impressed. I think that's an understatement, but I was absolutely blown away of the difference. I left in the beginning of the 90s, and I came back at the end
from London.
From London, yeah, and I was really impressed with the impact that devolution and the opening of the Scottish Parliament had on just the general confidence of the people and the aspirations that I could, really pick up from chatting to neighbours, and it just felt like a more confident country. It was more confident in its social attitudes and more progressive in its social attitudes. And I was particularly struck by the impact that the SNP had in minority government. That was something that was immediately apparent. And it wasn't really, I suppose, until both my parents voted SNP for years, long before I did, because I was down in London, and so I couldn't vote SNP there. So I was still stuck in the old habit of voting Labour. And after the Iraq War, I switched to the Liberal Democrats. And I guess all of those things came to a crushing explosion in 2010 when the Liberal Democrats assisted David Cameron to occupy Downing Street. And really a lot of my certainties about the future, and it's our future safety as a country, Scotland, really just it was almost like a real epiphany, and I just thought, no, never again. The country cannot go through Thatcherism, for shorthand, conservative rule. Can't go through that again. We have to have our independence. It has to happen, and it has to happen now. And so that was the moment for me when the Lib Dems agreed to allow David Cameron to become Prime Minister. And from then, I have done everything that I possibly can to use the skills and the energy that I've got to deliver independence. And so I stood for election in 2012. I was elected as a councillor from Dunfermline Central then, and I've stood in by-elections and lost. But I've also, I was elected as an independent MP at the end of 2019. So that's really, in a nutshell, why I'm in politics. Because I really believe not only that we can't afford to continue in the UK because it will continue to be damaging, and I think the last 10 years or so since David Cameron came into power, I've been right all along. That was a completely sharp analysis. And so we can't afford to stay in the UK, but we have so much potential to grow and prosper as a nation outside the UK. Whether it's back in the EU or not, we will prosper. I would prefer to be in the EU because I think it's the right future for us. That's my personal view.
Mm-hmm. But I believe that EFTA is a better short-term solution at the very least.
Well, I mean, I think all of these things need to be considered, and those are decisions that we can take as a country if we're independent. I'm not wedding one to the other. Mm-hmm. I think that's an important distinction to make, and I think that's probably the right judgment to make. But that's my personal view, and until we shape our internal policies, and I will put my tuppence worth in to any debate that we have, but that will be something for the party to come to a reasoned decision. I don't think any one of us seek to dictate our political position to the rest of the party.
Okay, all right. And tell me about your experience in Westminster. And so you were first elected in 2017. Is that right? Or
I was elected to Westminster in 2019. So the December 2019, the one that Boris got his thumping majority.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how would you reflect on the culture of Westminster?
It's a strange place, but it's not. I mean, I think a lot of people say that it's a bit of a stuffy old boys club. Maybe that was their experience at the time, and I think that may have been accurate. This Parliament, there are a lot more women around. I would certainly say that the relationships that I've developed with some of the other MPs have been really helpful, particularly through the Health and Social Care Select Committee. That's a cross-party group. I was the only SNP at that time MP present, and I'm no longer a member of that because I'm no longer a member of the SNP. But I think my performance on that committee was really valued by my committee colleagues, certainly by the chair and members across the Conservative and Labour parties. And I think I was able to secure that respect because I didn't act in a partisan or political way, because I think health's far too important to do that. Of course, the exception to that is when the Secretary of State for Health came to the committee. I was very direct with him.
That's Mr. Hancock.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And let's see. And what was the logic of your decision to leave the SNP and join Alba as and you and Kenny McCaskill are the two from Westminster that have done so. Can you? I'm sure it wasn't a decision taken lightly. So if you could sort of walk us through.
No, it wasn't a decision taken lightly, and it was a decision taken with a significant personal risk. And it has impacted on relationships that I've had politically for many years and relationships that I value. And I hope that in due course time will heal some of that. But I think I don't think it's a surprise to anyone to say that my relationship with the SNP became challenging in the election of 2019. Mm-hmm. When comments emerged from social media that I had made, one which was an image appended to an article which was not about anything other than global capitalism, but unfortunately had an image that wasn't visible when I read it on my phone attached to it, which was considered to be an anti-Semitic trope. And so that was.
I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
That was quite upsetting. The other comment was in relation to some of, I think, what any reasonable person would consider to be extremely heavy-handed actions by the IDF against some Palestinian people, and I pondered a question which was was loaded. I guess it wasn't intended to be offensive, and I don't think certainly the people that I've engaged with feel that it was intended to be offensive. But I'm not in a position. I'm not a Jewish person, and I'm not in a position to make a judgment as to whether something is anti-Semitic or offensive. That's not my place. I take that guidance from the Jewish community, and if that was their reading of the situation, then I accepted that immediately and apologized and sought to make amends. So that I think I did what I believed to be the right thing. And I certainly, the feedback that I've had from people like Andrew Percy MP and Danny Stone of the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust, people who know the subject incredibly well, they have been incredibly warm, supportive and accepting of the work that I've done to further understanding of anti-Semitism since then. And so I take that as not in any way excusing the behavior, but certainly validation that I've made real progress and that I'm doing what I'm supposed to do as a public figure to move the debate forward. So that was a difficult period, and it was particularly a difficult period for some reasons that I don't really want to talk about just now, and I will do at some point in the future, no doubt. Mm-hmm. But it became difficult because I was instructed by the SNP to walk away from a competition that was completely winnable. And although, as I've said, I took on board and I apologized, I did not feel that I could do that on an individual basis, that I could walk away from a completely winnable seat for the independence cause, that I needed to see it through. I'd made a commitment. The nomination times had closed. I had to see that issue through. I had to give the people in the area the opportunity to vote for that platform. And so I went ahead with the election and I was elected. I don't think that was expected by a whole lot of people. And but I just felt that I had to go ahead, and so I was incredibly grateful to have that support. But I don't think, some critics will say, well, you were elected on the back of the SNP, you should resign as an MP now, and if you want to fight another election, do so. But the reality is, I don't think anybody in Scotland was under any illusion that I was being supported by the SNP in that campaign. Indeed, none other than the First Minister made frequent denouncements of my candidacy and instructed supporters of independence to support elsewhere. And such were the threats levelled against friends of mine from the party that they really could not help me. It wasn't they didn't want to. And there were some very courageous people like George Kay, who was a councillor that I worked with, and somebody who has serious misgivings about my recent decisions. And I regret that, but I hope that one day George will understand where I'm coming from. Those misgivings, that I've lost my train of thought, which is not a good thing. That I went ahead and that I was elected despite all of the rancor.
Okay.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to talk about. I apologize for losing my train of thought there.
Okay, yeah, it's just, and so talk about Alba and the logic of kind of what you talked a little bit about some of the personal things, which but just talk about what you feel Alba can do if a significant number of MSPs are elected on the list seats.
Yeah, well, I mean, first thing I would say is the reason for moving to Alba is so. I was eventually readmitted to the SNP, and I was in the SNP group formally from May until I left at the end of last month. And that journey was, or that period of time was probably less comfortable or more uncomfortable than the period where I was officially in the wilderness. When I was an independent MP at Westminster, many people in the SNP group were very supportive and very helpful. When I was readmitted, that support seemed to be turned off. And I began to suspect that much of the friendliness had actually been an attempt to get me to say something that they could report back. That's my own suspicion. I have no real evidence to base that on, but I do know that some members of the SNP group, senior members of the SNP group, behaved in a way that was less than honourable in the information that they passed on to persons out with the parliamentary group, and let's just leave it at that. So, there was a lot of shenanigans, really unacceptable behaviour, and I think it really all came to a head because, or it was all an issue because I have been vocal in my concerns about the implementation of the reform of the Gender Recognition Act, and I've been labelled a whole range of different things, encapsulated by being called a bigot, when actually my concern is bread and butter. It's about safeguarding, and safeguarding is a policy area which I've taken responsibility for in the NHS over 25 years, and I had the foolish belief that as a member of the LGBT community and somebody with that experience in safeguarding and policy writing, that my voice would be listened to, and it resolutely was not. In fact, I have had some of the most horrific abuse at the hands of colleagues because of it, as have people like Joanna Cherry. And we've both been labelled as not being team players, and it's basically because we won't be obedient. We won't follow the diktat. We've got concerns, and those concerns are not for mischief. They're based on our knowledge and skills over many, many years. And I am not the kind of person who will be silenced. When after the Salmond inquiry was finished, I know that's not the name of it for anybody who wants to attack me, but we all know what we're talking about when we say that. After that had concluded, the voices of certain members in the group became extremely shrill and I
You're speaking
explained,
in the Westminster Parliamentary Group?
yep.
Okay.
And so and people that I not only respect as parliamentarians because I've met them as an MP, but people going back many years, and particularly Kenny, who has had my respect since I entered the party, and does not need to explain or assert himself. He's earned that respect through the valiant work that he's done as Justice Minister, and also as a steadfast campaigner for Scotland's independence. For him to be traduced in the way that he was in that meeting and since, I felt was totally unacceptable. And I mentioned it almost in passing to him in a WhatsApp chat we were having during the last Westminster group meeting I went to. And that's when I found out about Alba. Mm-hmm. And it was almost like a huge relief to me that there was a different way where I wouldn't have to watch my tongue beyond what anybody would reasonably expect in public discourse, that I would be able to talk about issues that were important to me for the fact that they were important to me, and that I would be able to debate them and arrive at a democratic position as a party, and that would be respected. And I just felt that was, on a personal level, so attractive, such an attractive position. I felt absolutely unable to express my concern about the safety of women and children as a result of loose legislation that was being planned around GRA. And despite all the reassurances that I had sought and never been given, despite having done that, I just did not feel that I could resist this opportunity. Now, it's cost me, as I've said, but there are some things in life that some choices you just have to make if you want to do the right thing, and it's not always the easiest path to do the right thing. But I feel that, it's with deep regret that I feel that I had to leave the SNP. I love the SNP, and I love a lot of people and care a great deal about them who are still in there. There are still some wonderful, wonderful people in the SNP. I could no longer, in that position, continue to be a member and allow myself and others to be subjected to the kind of hostility that was being directed at us.
Okay. All right, so let's shift more towards the strategy of Alba, and what and how if there are a significant number of seats that are taken by Alba, how do you see that dynamic going forward? I mean, the hostility between Salmond and Sturgeon notwithstanding, how do you see that? How do you see that going forward?
Well, I mean, there's been a bit of hostility on social media. A lot of it seems to be being drummed up by people who are no friends of independence. Alec Massey was being particularly making particularly ill-judged comments on Twitter today. But I don't really see the point in meeting or discussing anything with Alex Massey. We all know his views. We all know the disdain that he has for supporters of independence. He's certainly no friend of mine. He's somebody who likes to use anti-Semitism as a weapon rather than as an honest concern. And that's unfortunate, but that's something for him to reflect on. It's not something that I can fix. I would hope that the friendships that have endured through some very tough times, particularly through the loss of the 2014 election, will rally round, and we will be able to
referendum, 2014 referendum.
Yeah. So there's friends of mine in who are standing, who campaigned with me then. There are others who have joined the cause from after then. So I hope that we'll be able to get past this. I think some of the choice of language that some folk have used has been really unhelpful. I think the attempt to continue to smear people is deeply unhelpful. You know, I think my comments on that are pretty clear from the interview Kenny and I gave to Hannah Rogers in the Herald that was published today. So I don't really feel I need to go over that ground again. But you know, we have to choose our battle, and my battle is with the Westminster Conservative government, who are forcing policies on Scotland that the people of Scotland would never vote for and have not voted for. So I'm not going to have full battles with people from the SNP, but I'm also not going to be abused or bullied by anyone any longer. And that's a distinction that I think is really important to make. So if I say something that may come across as combative to a member of the SNP, it will be as an assertive position. It will not be from a position of disrespect. It will be an assertive position about why I'm doing what I'm doing. I will defend my choice. You don't have to like it. What I won't do is attack the SNP. That's not what I'm trying to do. That's not what I'm about. I want people to vote for the SNP in this election. I want them to vote unanimously for the SNP in the constituency. What I'm asking them to do is to vote for the Alba party in the list so that we get a supermajority for the Yes movement and that we're able to begin our progress towards independence from the 7th of May. That is the objective. And I noticed in the chat there's a question come in about
the Green Party.
About the Green Party. Well, you know, I mean, I would say that
just to read it. Just to read it so that people understand.
Okay, sorry,
why should I vote for Alba to max the yes in quotes when Green are ahead in every region? Therefore, it's more likely to be successful. If it's truly and only about max the yes, then everyone in Alba should clearly concur. So, how would you respond to that?
Well, I would pick up two critical points there. If maxing the yes is what is going to deliver independence, why has it not been delivered from 2016 to now? Because there was an independence majority in this parliament between the Greens and the SNP. So if it hasn't happened in the last parliament, why would I assume that it's going to happen in the next parliament? Mm-hmm. We have seen the timidity and the tepid attitude towards independence that's come from the Greens up until now, and that's reflected on in the evidence that I've just cited. But the most important aspect for me is, if you are interested in really driving forward independence and you have concerns about GRA, about the hate crimes bill, about some of these authoritarian policies that are being dressed up as progressive, then you should consider voting for the Alba party. You know, it really is as simple as that. We've got a track record collectively of being absolutely committed to independence. We have a former First Minister of Scotland who delivered a referendum as the leader of our party. We have former MPs and current MPs who have also demonstrated an absolute commitment to independence. You ask many people in the area where I led the campaign during the referendum, they will say, and they've been saying on Twitter, you know, I worked tirelessly. I worked day and night for our campaign from 2012 right through to the vote. So whilst I agree that the environmental aspects of the Greens policy is important, you know, they're not alone in their concern for the environment. And my concern is that we're talking about kicking the can down the road for another 2 years, and that the Greens will have their environmental issues that they quite rightly put to the front of their manifesto. That's the reason for their existence. What we need is to inject some energy from an independence perspective, because I believe that if you're really concerned about our recovery from COVID, about protecting the NHS, about really delivering on green jobs and a green economy, the only way to do that is to put independence at the beginning of the progress of the next parliament. It's not something that can be left for another 2 years, because believe me, there is absolutely no way that Boris Johnson is going to prioritise investment in Scotland to get it out of the pandemic over the next 2 years so that we're ready to have a referendum. Quite the opposite is true. At the moment, the UK government control contracts for difference and drive down investment in Scotland through renewables. They tax energy that's generated in Scotland through the TUNOS scheme, but at the same time, they buy energy from France for free. So this notion of one United Kingdom all together collectively is absolutely false. And so we must seek our independence first and foremost. It's got to be at the front of the queue. And once we secure our independence, then we can really start tackling all of the fundamental challenges that we face as a nation.
Yeah. Melanie, what do you think about the current situation in Northern Ireland? Having lived there as a boy, that it must be quite despairing.
It is. I spent quite a long time away from Northern Ireland. After my grandparents passed away, I didn't really go back there until my father was quite old, just before he died. So we went back to Northern Ireland and Ireland for the first time since the 80s, about 4 years ago. And we've been over there for a few holidays to visit relatives, and things are, immensely different in both sides of the border. We were in Donegal, but we travelled through Northern Ireland to get there. And it's heartbreaking, is the only way to put it, that violence in any shape or form has returned to the streets. And, the responsibility for that lies squarely with Boris Johnson and his absolutely reckless position, promising the world to everyone and their wife without having a sketch of a plan of how to solve some of the most complex challenges politically anywhere in the world. So, yeah, it's the risk of undoing all of the hard-won progress of the peace process on the sake of on the back of Brexit is truly heartbreaking. And I'm not going to pretend I've got a solution to this at all. The solution is for community leaders to try and get folk in the communities to step back from the abyss. And I don't know. I really don't know what to say. It's heartbreaking.
Alison asked, why do you think that the SNP are kicking the can down the road again? I read the part of the SNP manifesto came out today, and basically they promised to have I think they're agreeing with the Greens to hold a referendum when the pandemic is over, and within the next they say within the first half of the next of the next government. But why do you assert that they're kicking the can down the road?
Well, I don't need to assert it. The First Minister has made that point repeatedly on the television. It's the First Minister that said, once we get on top of the pandemic, well, that's how long is this piece of string? That could, getting on top of the pandemic, being able to secure our recovery from the pandemic, even if we have no further health issues, is going to take significant investment. To get that significant investment, the Scottish Government have already admitted, will require borrowing. The UK government have made it clear they're not going to allow the Scottish Government to borrow. In fact, what they're doing is legislating to remove powers from the Scottish Government. And so, it's not beyond the wit of a man to look at that and say, okay, this is never going to happen that way round. And that's why I say that you've got to put the case for independence at the front of the queue. Because the longer we allow the Conservative government in Westminster to control our affairs and our economy and our ability to find our way out of the current pandemic, is lost time. And it is a foolish promise that you can somehow bide your time on this issue, particularly when we know that the Westminster government are now pulling legislation that's been passed by the Scottish Parliament and submitting that to the Supreme Court to try and overturn that legislation. This is, it's not so much the thin end of the wedge. I think we're well past the thin end of the wedge. This is where we're beginning to see the deconstruction of Scottish democracy and the reintroduction of a direct rule from London. And that must be resisted, and we must resist it democratically. We can't wait until our democratic structures have been taken away from us. So that's why I think, I've made some comments over the past couple of days that there's no urgency in the Westminster group to have a conversation about what they can do about independence. They might not like me saying that, but that is a fact. That is a fact. So, there's plenty of information available to me that suggests, and to the wider public, that suggests that there's no urgency from the SNP. And that's why the Alba party in the Holyrood Parliament will be the fire in their belly to make sure that that happens, because I know that there are some people in the SNP who are not satisfied with that situation, and they would be happy to get behind a much more robust push for independence.
And given your own anecdotal, just conversations you've had with SNP supporters, what percentage of them do you think would be willing to vote for Alba? I mean, just kind of anecdotally, if you can, because a recent poll had them, has Alba getting 6 seats, and already. So yes. How? And what, it's been 3 weeks since Alba was announced. So,
well, I would hope, I would have been hopeful that everybody in the Yes movement would see this as a tremendous opportunity to advance our cause. I think, as Alec put it, that that would be the standard for people to rally to, and he invoked that imagery. And that's really what I would hope that people will do, because this is not about innuendo. This is not about anything that's happened previously. This is about Scotland's future. That's all that matters to me. That's why I got involved in politics. That's why I made the decisions that I've made about which party I sit under. It's how do I think we will achieve independence as swiftly as possible, and what's our best chance to get there. And so that, for me, is the clincher. I know there's a lot of people who have been waiting with bated breath for something like this to happen. The Wings Over Scotland site did an opinion poll the end of last summer, and there were somewhere around about 12 to 16% of people said that they would vote for that type of party if one existed, so on the list. So that's the ones who would definitely do it, according to that poll. Since there was another 12 or 15% who would consider it, and effectively there was 50% of the electorate said they would never vote for any party that was on the list. So there's at least 50% of people who would give it their consideration. And I would ask them, what is more important, listening to tittle-tattle and innuendo, or the future of Scotland? What is the most important thing? And please make your decision based on what's going to be the best for the future of Scotland, because that's what we're all after. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Anita, this is just a comment. The Greens are the biggest threat to the SNP. They're standing in 12 constituency seats directly going against the SNP. And I'm sure you would. Well, it's a
yeah. I'll say hello to Anita while I'm at it. But thanks for making that point, Anita, because it is absolutely true. The Greens are the ones that lost Edinburgh Central for the SNP at the last parliamentary election, because they stood a candidate there and took sufficient votes away from the yes vote and handed that seat to Ruth Davidson, allowing her to claim an enormous defeat of the SNP, which was laughable, really. But that was the line that the media went with, because she won a seat.
I'd like to get more about the media in a minute, but Lars of Mars agreeing with his heartbreak. I fear independence is even further from our reach now than it was in 2014. feels like even the SNP are actively working against it, and I just despair. I'm seriously consider giving Alba my list vote in Rutherglen, but so far they have zero visibility, and I remain to be convinced of their chance of success. So and as we know, Alba is very new. So I mean, if you could talk a little bit about the basically the campaign and how the campaign is going to what are you going to do as a campaign in the coming weeks before the election?
Yeah, well, we're a very young party. We've only been in existence for a matter of weeks. We have now more members, considerably more members than the Liberal Democrats. We have, I think, recruited almost every activist for independence across Scotland. When I say that, I mean the ones that go out and do the hard graft. So we've got a huge army of people who are ready to get cracking, and we have great plans for visibility. Now, obviously, the key thing is, where do we get our posters and garden signs and the like too? That is something that everybody can help us with by getting in touch with somebody that you know who's a local member, or getting in touch with the Alba Party website to let us know if you have got access, particularly to prominent sites. We don't want to put these things up willy-nilly, but if you know of prominent sites, then please get in touch with somebody that you know. And there's plenty of activists now being mobilized. There's leafleting that will be happening, and we will continue to strive to get fair and balanced coverage on the mainstream media, but they clearly do not want to give us any coverage, going back to the opening point, because they see us as a very real and palpable threat. And we are. And that opinion poll that I cited earlier, if we even secure just the votes of those who are fully committed to supporting a party such as Alba on the list, then we have enough to secure 2 MSPs per region. If we can push it even probably another 50% into the next batch of folk, then we can get 3 MSPs a region. And whilst that's great for us, the real prize is that those 24 seats would be taken from unionist parties. It would quiet the union voice in our parliament, and our parliament would no longer be about you can't do this and you can't do that. It would be united in what we can do, the kind of policies we want to make, and we would be able to, as a parliament, take that argument down to Boris Johnson, not as a party, not as a first minister, not as just these single offices, but as a whole party, a whole parliament, and as a whole country. We would be able to articulate our voice to Westminster and to the rest of the world.
Okay, and tell us, how do you see the coverage? I mean, it seems as Alex Salmond was not allowed into the he wasn't invited to the leaders debates that happened, I believe, last Tuesday or the previous one. And is there pressure to be what can the party do about that to bypass the lack, let's just say, the lack of media coverage, and when it is, it's often very hostile?
Yeah, well, I mean, people consume media in very different ways these days, and social media is a big platform, and we will capitalize on that. Also, we've been quite forthright in respecting the new media during our campaign, and there is an audience there. One of the arguments that the SNP have used many times is that word of mouth is one of the most powerful messages, because people trust the message from people that they already have a relationship with, much more than they do when it's trotted out from the mainstream media. And I would say that in Scotland, whether you're a unionist or an independent supporter, the distrust of mainstream media has never been greater. Particularly around some of the cronyism stuff that's been going on in Westminster. Even that we have conservatives that don't trust the BBC, and we have the independent supporters that that don't trust the BBC. And BBC have got themselves into an absolute fankle over their lack of impartiality, or perceived lack of impartiality.
Okay, and let's see, another question: why have you not resigned and stood for Alba in a by-election? Well, that would be from your Westminster seat, and how do you, and expanding on that, how do you see your dual role if you are elected to the? First of all, which list are you in, and what number are you on the list?
I'm second, so there's a female candidate, Eva Comrie, who is a disabled woman who heads our list, which I think is a really important demographic that I'm very comfortable to get right behind Eva at the top of the list. I'm second, and that's in Mid Scotland and Fife. So that stretches all the way through Fife, obviously. Up into Perthshire and through Stirlingshire and Clacks, so it's that whole region. But in terms of my Westminster seat, I don't see any real conflict here. Why wouldn't a Scottish parliamentarian who wants to represent the very best interests of his or her constituents want to sit in the parliament of their country? When I stood for election as an MP, I had absolutely no intention of working to seek re-election. That was not on my in any of my speeches, because I wanted to be the last MP for Kirkcaldy and Cowdenbeath. Mm-hmm. And so any notion that I think I've covered enough of this, but any notion that I owe it to the SNP to allow them to compete for the seat that they did precious little as a party to help me. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't people from the SNP who helped me, but they were warned off by the SNP. So this is, I wasn't elected on the back of the SNP's support as such. So, they don't get to dictate to me whether I should stand for a by-election. But there's a more important point there, and it comes back to one of the things that I found utterly bizarre, which was when Joanna Cherry wanted to stand for Holyrood, and the decision was made to prevent dual mandates, something that the SNP and, in fact, Labour First Ministers and others have done, which is to hold a dual mandate. I can think of no other case than an MP who wishes to extract themselves from the Westminster Parliament and move into the Scottish Parliament. Mm-hmm. I can think of no better reason why that person should not hold a dual mandate. It is I think it is a demonstration of intention. And could you imagine if, a handful or 10 or 15 of the best MPs in Westminster had been put forward by the SNP to fill some of the very capable shoes that are sadly leaving Parliament after this election. People like, there's a whole list of them. I'm not going to pick anybody on their Todd, but there's a whole list of experienced parliamentarians leaving this time. Why would you not, as a statement of intent, put some of your best MPs into those seats and say, we are going to move back to Scotland, and this is a statement of intent that we're not hanging around in London? Why would you not do that? I think that was a really lost opportunity, and it's exactly where we should be as a nation. We should be pulling our MPs back up into Scotland, and we should be thinking about how we're going to move our constitutional arrangements into a new future.
Okay, and that ties in to this question. What's the biggest difference since moving to Alba? What are the pluses, or what are the pluses of moving to Alba? I know that you've talked about your difficulty with personal relationships, but what are some of the positive aspects of joining Alba?
I think the most important one is being able to have a frank conversation with you tonight, Mark. Mm-hmm. I don't think this is anything that I would have been prepared to do, because it would have been a very risky thing for me to consider. Mm-hmm. I certainly don't think it would have been anything I would have been allowed to do. if I had asked for permission. So the ability to be able to speak freely to voters about how I believe we should progress the constitutional debate, and that's the biggest benefit, without question.
Okay. What's your stance on the gender issue? You spoke about that. We spoke. I don't know if James, you can rewatch it. I know we addressed it earlier in the conversation, but if you could just
yeah, I'll make one further comment on that. You know, I mean, listen, I was the chair of Fife Pride, which is the local LGBT Pride event, for 2 years in Fife. The first year I was incredibly active. The second year my father was unwell, so I was in much more of an advisory capacity with Pat Greenhow and the team, who did an amazing job anyway. But, you know, I am absolutely 100% behind the reform of the Gender Recognition Act and for making the lives of trans people much more integrated in society, in a way that they feel safe, and that the way that society respects and understands the challenges that they have faced and is warm and welcoming. Of course I am. But what I don't accept is the introduction of legislation that has that's loose when it comes to safeguarding, that doesn't robustly protect the vulnerable group of the trans community from infiltration by others, and that doesn't protect some of the most vulnerable women and children in society from potential intrusion for nefarious purposes. And I can't find a logical argument in my head that would say of any group, no, we don't need safeguarding here. We have it for doctors, we have it for nurses, we have it for a whole range of professions. And I think that, you know, if you're going to be given privileged access to particular groups where vulnerability is obvious, then as a society, we have a responsibility and an expectation that legislation has appropriate safeguards. It's nothing more, nothing less. It's not about liking anybody's lifestyle or having a particularly judgmental view on that. In fact, quite the opposite. It's about making sure that we are all able to live our very best lives.
Okay, a couple more before I let you make your closing statement. From Melanie, I really like what he's saying, and then he won't talk down other parties, even though he was treated badly by them. All for country and indie. Well done, Neale. So
thank you very much, Melanie. That's very kind of you.
And from David, I think there's a one-word answer to this, but what are you looking forward to delivering as an Alba Party MSP?
That would be independence. That would be independence. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, it's been about an hour, so we'd like to wrap it up. But just if you have anything you'd like to say in parting.
Yeah. I mean, listen, guys. You know, I'm not going to profess to be anybody who's more important or more special than anyone else. I'm in this for the same purposes, and I occupy the office that I occupy because I believe in our ultimate goal of independence. It's the reason that I got involved in politics. It's quite definitely the thing that drives me, and I really genuinely believe that if we are able to come together, vote SNP in every constituency, and elect an outstanding MSP under that SNP banner, but also swing your support behind the Alba Party in the list, we will have our independence much more rapidly than Boris Johnson can believe.
Okay. All right. On that note, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you to our
pleasure.
And thank you to our audience for listening. So if you want to hang on for chat for a couple minutes after. So.
Yes, of course, no problem. council group,